Where people are dying is these areas over here where it's just a rock face cliff. They're jumping down at heights equivalent to what people are jumping off the Gay Street Bridge to commit suicide. Breaking bones. People don't realize when you hit the water that from a height that it's disabling them, and they're drowning.
Greetings and welcome to Gripping Horror. This is Augusta Quarry, one of the most scenic locations in the city of Fort Dickerson, Tennessee. Beneath the placid reflection, the water is deep, really deep. For decades, this quarry has been plagued with swimmers leaping from its deadly 80 to 100 feet high cliffs in search of a thrill. Despite increased efforts by the city to discourage this risky behavior, many people still jump. In 2015, city workers posted signs and temporary fencing along the cliffs at the quarry after 3 men jumped to their death in a 4-week period. The Knox County Rescue Squad is responsible for responding to these incidents and would routinely go down to the quarry and drag for dead bodies at least once a year. In the span of 50 years and countless calls, only one has tragically ended in fatality. This is the story of Corey Berggren. Born on April 2nd, 1955, Corey Berggren was a person few and far between. According to those who knew him, he loved to dance, he loved to flirt, he loved to dive, he loved to live. Corey possessed a heart of gold and dedicated 2 decades of his life to working at the Tennessee School for the Deaf. When he wasn't working, Corey was an active Special Services member of the Knoxville Volunteer Emergency Rescue Squad's water rescue team, and was considered one of the best trained divers in the Southeast. He held a dozen diving instructor certifications, including Trimix, Assistant Cavern, DAN Oxygen, YMCA SLAM and Cavern, and EANX Cave Diver courses. He was also interested in computers and combined computers with diving to produce software which allowed divers to create dive tables by using multiple gas changes. Corey was also an author of many instructional scuba diving manuals, establishing himself as a credible source in the diving community. The Knoxville Volunteer Emergency Rescue Squad began with 12 men meeting in a garage more than 50 years ago. The story started September 16th, 1956, when 15-year-old Charles Edward Howard dived into the swift-moving waters of the Holston River in Strawberry Plains. He never came up. Knox County had no organized rescue squad, and the search for the boy's body lasted for days until authorities called in members of the Greenville Rescue Squad to help local volunteers. 10 men met in Bill Dixon's garage on Rutledge Pike a month later to talk about forming a rescue squad. Willard Howard, the drowned boy's father, attended the first meeting. Early members of KVERS received basic training in first aid and learned other tactics on duty. Now, the squad boasts an annual budget of $335,000 and teams that specialize in such tactics as cave rescue, water rescue, trench rescue, medical treatment, diving, and support. The squad has earned national recognition for its efforts. Agencies around the country often call for help. The KVERS organization saves the county millions of dollars as they do it all free of charge. Some calls end up bringing new recruits. Kirsty Cook joined after the squad helped recover the body of her 20-month-old son, Will Brown, who drowned when her estranged husband jumped from the South Knoxville Bridge on Christmas Day, 2003, with a boy in his arms. The crews never know what the next call might bring, but they never hesitate to answer a page or walk out the door. Knoxville was once nicknamed Marble City and became nationally famous for pinkish rock quarried in deep pits close to what would become downtown Knoxville. Originally a 1,000-foot high hill topped by a Union Civil War fort, Augusta Quarry was excavated for limestone during the first half of the 20th century. After the Lamberts ran the operation as a family business, Vulcan Materials acquired the quarry and managed its final stages. By the 1970s, the quarry closed and the water pumping ceased. Without the removal of water, the quarry filled and a 300-foot deep lake formed. It became a hotspot to dump undesired things, such as cars and bodies in Knoxville. Divers of the Knoxville Rescue Squad were regularly sent down to read the VIN numbers on the cars that were at the bottom to make sure there weren't any new cars dumped in the quarry. At one point, the city of Knoxville blocked car access by putting boulders in the path of the trail due to the immense amount of dumping. The quarry is currently used by the local residents of Knoxville as a swimming spot. Augusta Quarry has the reputation for hosting a lively crowd. The quarry has been used as a popular drinking spot since the beginning of the 1980s. Thus, the diving deaths are generally drunk people going to the higher cliffs and jumping off from way too high, according to DJ Corcoran, Knoxville Fire Department spokesperson. He said it's like hitting concrete. When people jump from a ledge that high, it's like jumping off the Gay or Henley Street Bridge. When they come up, they have broken ribs, bruises on arms where they hit the water, and it knocks the wind out of them. As stated before, Augusta Quarry is deep, in places up to 300 feet deep or more. With no lifeguard on duty, swimmers are at their own risk. The signs posted all around the cliffs of the quarry read, "There are serious dangers to swimming in a quarry." The city of Knoxville does not authorize, invite, or recommend swimming here, and it is not responsible for any death or injury. Despite the city of Knoxville's clear disapproval of swimming in this area, locals still flock to the site during summer months. Though, very few individuals actually dive the site with scuba gear. There's a full-size crane left over from the quarry's working days. At 211 feet, but close to zero, divers have made the dive down to explore it. On August the 24th, 1995, the Knoxville Volunteer Rescue Squad received a distress call regarding a young man by the name of Aaron, who had spent the day at Augusta Quarry with his 4 roommates. Aaron had encountered difficulties after jumping from the cliffs at the quarry and never resurfaced. Drowning victims often float to the surface of water over time. However, the depths of quarry waters and the debris scattered on the quarry floor often entomb drowning victims. To enter the water in a sane way, divers must approach the quarry from the south side, where an old mining road enters the water at a gentle slope. During the subsequent recovery operation, Corey opted to dive with nitrox. Nitrox is not typically used for deep diving because it contains a higher percentage of oxygen, which can become harmful or toxic when breathed under high-pressure conditions, such as those encountered at significant depths in the quarry. Divers often use different gas mixtures, like Trimix, for deep dives to prevent oxygen toxicity and ensure their safety. Corey mistakenly used a set of dive tanks filled with 36% nitrox, which proved to be a fatal mistake. The maximum operating depth of nitrox with 36% oxygen is 29 meters or 95 feet to ensure the partial pressure of oxygen does not reach dangerous levels, resulting in oxygen toxicity. As the dive progressed, Corey and his partner used powerful cave lights to explore the lower depths of the quarry when the light reflected off a shiny object. A closer examination revealed human remains still clad in a pair of bright red shorts, like the ones Aaron had been wearing when he drowned. Approximately 27 minutes into the dive, at a depth of 212 feet, Corey experienced oxygen convulsions. This dire situation was a result of the nitrox within his tanks becoming dangerously toxic due to the extreme depth he had reached, subsequently triggering a seizure followed by asphyxiation. Losing control of his movements, Corey shot uncontrollably towards the surface from the unforgiving depth of 212 feet. Subjecting his body to a brutal and rapid change in pressure it could not withstand. Standby divers of the KVERS on the surface managed to recover Corey's lifeless body, while his dive partner recovered the body of Aaron, which now had multiple water moccasin bites. Following this tragic incident, Corey was rushed to the University of Tennessee Medical Center and immediately placed within a hyperbaric chamber for decompression. Tragically, his horrific ordeal continued as he suffered a heart attack during this process. And despite the valiant efforts of medical professionals, Corey succumbed to the heart failure and passed away at the medical center. More than 40 rescue agencies were represented at Corey's funeral. which was interpreted in sign language for students of the Tennessee School for the Deaf. A rescue squad dive truck carried his body to the cemetery, where a Lifestar emergency helicopter flew overhead in tribute. He was survived by his parents, Polly and Fred Berggren, and brother, Kevin. In 1996, a year after the tragic accident, Corey was honored by the United States official National EMS Memorial Service. Longtime squad members still fall silent at the mention of Corey's name. When asked about him today, his teammates speak with a strange mix of detachment, muffled sadness, and restless unease. A shiny, wood-mounted commemorative plaque, inscribed with Corey's name, stands alone in the center of the squad's front room trophy case, part memory and part reminder. On August the 25th, 2020, the squad gathered at Augusta Quarry for a solemn ceremony, remembering Corey. A wreath was floated as the squad members reflected on the sacrifices that he made. The volunteer organization that started out as a handful of men in ties, answering calls in a converted bread truck, now encompass 143 members, male and female, who answered more than 2,600 calls per year around East Tennessee. In present day, the Augusta Quarry is transitioning into a public recreation site. The Aslan Foundation is partnering with the city of Knoxville to redesign this site in 3 phases. Phase 1 created a temporary parking area to access the Quarry Lake in the summer of 2017. Phase 2, in 2018, included the construction of a gateway, roadway, and parking lot. Phase 3 will include the construction of a boardwalk, kiosk, and restrooms. The $5 million upgrades are expected to wrap up by the summer of 2024. The war on cliff jumpers has shown no signs of stopping. Deaths are happening 3 times every year. Those who choose to leap into the quarry waters will be left entirely at the mercy of its depths. Greece is a land of mysteries. The land itself holds mysteries. There are caves everywhere, more than 10,000 charted caves, some so dangerous and extensive they've never been fully explored. Such is the caverns of Vouliagmeni Lake. The lake is known for its dangerous maze of underwater caves and unpredictable currents, which makes its exploration extremely difficult and dangerous, even for the most experienced and well-trained professional divers. 3 Americans encountered a tragic fate in its depths in 1978, only to be recovered decades later. This is the story of Jan Granroth, Mark Granroth, and Donald Muchard. 15 miles south of Athens, the lagoon formed about 2,000 years ago. It was once a large cavern that collapsed following an earthquake. The outline of the collapsed cavern roof can be clearly discerned from a distance. The lake has quite unique environmental conditions. It is supplied with warm seawater, around 28 to 35 degrees Celsius, via an underground channel spreading through a network of flooded caves, so its temperature never drops below 18 degrees Celsius. It continues deep inside the mountain, in an underwater cave never fully explored, as its end seems impossible to trace, even by employing sonar detection. The submerged cavern is located near the rocks at the edge of the lake. Among the 14 tunnels that run through the cave, one reaches 800 meters in length, 60 to 150 meters wide, making it one of the world's longest. There is also a huge stalagmite in the cave, at a depth of 105 meters and 730 meters from the entrance, which is among the biggest in the world. Many underwater expeditions have been carried out in order to map the cave, and a few amateur divers have drowned trying. The first to try and explore the cave, as the historical evidence shows, were the Germans in the 40s. The research expeditions and first scientific findings were enough to expose the imagination of many amateur divers. Several years later, 2 divers trying to explore the cave lost their lives during decompression, just a few meters before the surface of the lake, with their bodies never found. This event prompted Swiss diver Jean-Jacques Bollins, renowned as one of the most famous divers of his era and serving as the president of the International Association of Cave Divers, to embark on the ambitious endeavor of exploring and mapping the cave within the lake. This was initiated in 1988 as part of a program supported by the Ministry of Culture and financed by the municipality of Vuliagmeni. In his first dive, he discovered at a depth of 30 meters a narrow passage leading to an underwater room with a capacity of 1,200,000 cubic meters. Jean attributed the two divers' deaths to both the strong currents inside the cave, causing small whirlpools in the water, and the lack of knowledge both for the geography and for the morphology of the cave. In addition to these first two divers who disappeared in the cave, 6 more explorers lost their lives, whose death was attributed to inadequate equipment and lack of familiarity with the underwater environment of the cave. Most of them didn't even have the Ariandes mitt, a crucial nylon rope used by cavers to navigate caves and avoid getting lost in the intricate underground labyrinths. In 1995, following a decision by the ministry, the cave was closed to the public for security reasons. Since then, only diving for scientific purposes has been permitted. In present day, because of its constant warm water temperature and its rich content in hydrogen sulfide, the lake has functioned as a spa. Even Greek doctors prescribe time in Vouliagmeni for a wide mix of symptoms. Born August 8, 1946, 32-year-old Air Force Sergeant Donald Mitchard was stationed at the US Air Force support base at the Athens airport in Greece, called Hellinikon. He had enlisted in the Air Force 12 years earlier, just after graduation from Bideford High School. In contrast, the Granroth siblings, Jan, age 20, and Mark, age 21, had their roots in Sacramento. Jan Granroth had graduated from Encina High School, and her brother attended Rio Americano High School. Jan was outgoing and athletic. She chose the military to give her life direction. Notably, she served as her platoon leader during her basic training, demonstrating her leadership abilities. Mark Granroth, who was involved in the family's paint contracting business, was also an avid athlete. He bicycled in the Hawaiian Islands and went backpacking. Both Donald Minchard and Airman First Class Jan Granroth found themselves stationed at the Hellinikon base near Athens. Mark planned a summer trip to Greece to go diving with Jan. They were both excellent divers, according to Arnold Granroth, cousin of Mark and Jan. They had also planned to do a trek together across Europe. On September the 9th, 1978, Mark and Jan arrived at Lake Vuliagmeni on a late summer day, accompanied by Donald, who was a more experienced diver than the siblings. Jan had been diving for 2 years at this point. Donald was a diving instructor and often accompanied Jan on dives. The trio were exploring the undersea caves when they disappeared without a trace. Cave diving in 1978 was still developing, and if not trained properly, it was even worse of a risk. Accident analysis from these tragedies brought about the current rules and training of cave divers. The trio made multiple fatal mistakes by entering the cave without any forms of a guideline, lights, or spare tanks. And these errors ultimately culminated in tragedy as the trio became lost and unable to find their way out of the extensive tunnels. Experienced Swiss caver Arne Ontelek was trapped in the tunnels in the cave after being hit by nitrogen narcosis on an expedition following the years of the Americans' disappearance. He described the harrowing experience, saying, "I suddenly felt like I was bound with invisible ropes, trapped in a crystal clear space, and then I realized why the unfortunate divers never came out of there." He continued saying, "Deep narcosis and my vast tunnel created confusion. Immediately, I lost my sense of depth and distance, and I became dizzy." Fortunately, Arne was saved due to his experience, but also because he used the figure of another diver as a point of reference in the underground labyrinth. Greek authorities used dyes in the water near the cave entrance in an unsuccessful attempt to find another way into the cavern. A week later, they called off the search after one of the divers nearly drowned when a current ripped off his face mask. When they abandoned the search, Fran Granroth, mother of Mark and Jan, took up hers. She wrote every president who moved into the White House, starting with Jimmy Carter. Because the divers had no lights with them, she said she couldn't believe they were cave diving. Political unrest might have endangered Americans abroad, she thought. 2 weeks after the divers disappeared, Greek authorities issued a presumptive finding of death. But Arnold Granroth, a cousin of Jan and Mark, said their father, Russell Granroth made 2 trips to Greece seeking information about Jan and Mark's disappearance. Unfortunately, Russell passed away in 1992, never knowing what did happen to Mark and Jan. Nearly 3 decades later, their bodies were discovered by members of a Greek diving club, who were searching for the remains of the Greek photographer that had entered the caves in 1990 in an attempt to locate the missing Americans. After failing to match the remains to the missing photographer, Greek authorities released the bodies on February 14, 2007, and sent them to US military officials for DNA testing. It was not until June 19th that mother of Mark and Jan, Fran Granroth, got a call confirming the remains were of her children. She expressed mixed feelings about the return of her children's remains, saying, "Every Christmas, you think maybe they are still alive. Now I know that they are gone." She dismissed the notion that the funeral would provide any form of closure, stating, "There is no final anything in a death, particularly young people. You think about them forever." They are also survived by their brother Jim, a painting contractor who lives in Sacramento. Jim Granroth was 16 when his 2 older siblings disappeared. Funerals for Mark and Jan were scheduled for August 4th, 2007, in Sebeka, Minnesota. Donald was laid to rest in Biddeford, Maine, on a Friday. He was survived by his wife Rosemary and their 3 children, Eunice, Robert and Catherine. May Jan, Mark and Donald rest in peace. This has been Gripping Horror. I hope to see you in the next one.